friends on Facebook, an instant hit on Insta, trolling a twit with a tweet on Twitter, that one guy on LinkedIn. Or if you're TikTok famous, America loves her social media. We're obsessed with it. And it's come to be as influential in forming our opinions as our political system itself. And it's reshaping the way we approach celebrity and even income. There is a cultism to social media that feeds into our base instincts to react when we see something that strikes our ire. Now that plays into the overarching theme of this season of Overthinking Everything, deconstructing a culture of cultism. As we've broken down and deconstructed some of the events surrounding our nation's history with political parties, ideologies, we're going to spend a few episodes talking about how that cultism can influence where we take a stand on key issues that involve us, and even those that don't. A common theme this season will be social media's influence on us, our views, our politics, and our beliefs, how we view and treat others. In this episode, I'm deconstructing some similar notions I've seen for years on social media over the idea of minimum wage in America. Social media can certainly impact how we look at an issue, and it also gives us a glimpse at the real attitudes and ideals of those to whom we are connected. And personally, I prefer to call this debate the livable wage rather than minimum. Minimum just makes it sound so greedy, cruel. Well, because this, just like everything else in America, is steeped in white privilege and the oppression of others, and drenched in the blood of greed. Capitalism. And welcome to the podcast. Social media. The memes we see, the posts we share, the talks we tick, and the chats we snap. These, if we aren't careful, can begin to brainwash us, leading us down a way of thinking without nuance or objectivity. We are conditioned to seek out confirmation bias over anything that would challenge our ideas. Social media ideas shared the way they are in visual, short bursts can be conditioning to some degree. A while back, I was on Facebook and I saw a meme that was problematic. But the comments were more bothersome. They lacked any nuance. They lacked any compassion or empathy. Many of these comments were primal, uncivilized. The meme posed the question: would you rather give a homeless person $1 million or a job and a driver's license? This resonated with me because I've had so many similar ideas thrown at me in this debate over the minimum wage, homelessness, and the ethics of humanity of capitalism. This idea of homelessness in this question, it's misunderstood. And I want to address that first because I believe understanding this is fundamental to the rest of my argument on this subject. I'm going to delve more into this in future episodes, but our perspective on homelessness in America is very skewed. We tend to think homeless as standing on the corner of the interstate off-ramp begging for spare change, or living under a bridge, pushing a shopping cart, living at the local mission. This simply isn't the case for most Americans experiencing this level of poverty. In America, so many families are one insufficient funds fee away from ruin. In America, we park next to someone and think how nasty and cluttered their car is, how they must be a hoarder, without the crushing realization of how close we are to standing next to our own very possible outcome if things go south. That never happened to me because I take care of my business. We hear that a lot. That level of disconnect from our empathy in this very debate astonishes and offends me. We look at our homeless in this country as no better than criminals. In fact, in my own state, they are considered criminals now. How horrible is an economic system when those who can't play the game, who lost the game, are held in such repugnant disdain by so many in our society? That was rhetorical. Feel free to answer in the comments. Okay, back to the subject of a livable and governmentally mandated minimum wage. Regarding the initial question posed, giving a homeless person a driver's license and a job for $1 million. It's a question that's designed to box us into one way of thinking or another without challenging our own biases or prejudices. First off, why do either or? These are weird moral dilemmas that muck up the compassionate discussion because they launch us into an either or, pick a side, right? They aren't designed to elicit deeper thought, critical thinking, and higher order reasoning over a subject, but instead to garner a reaction, which is invaluable social media currency. Personally, I'm giving my homeless homie all the money, so he doesn't have to sell his soul busting his ass for some greedy corporation or some greedy boss who will never pay him what he's worth. Appreciate the work he's done and the value that she's brought to the company, or acknowledge them as a human being. Giving him the money means he doesn't need a driver's license. He can hire a driver, creating more jobs. Then, because I hook bro up, maybe he might invest in one of my brilliant ideas. I have a lot, and we could start a business and employ even more people. Or we could give the dude 3 jobs at $10 an hour and he can live in poverty, sucking at the teat of government assistance, living barely paycheck to paycheck, and will never really contribute more to our economy than he costs. And she'll probably never be able to afford that car to use the driver's license. Debt. Smothered in debt. Give poor people money. Poor people spend money. And that's a big reason why poor people are poor. That's also why America's economy thrives. Giving poor people more money, that isn't socialism. It's simple, effective, flood-up economics, as opposed to the failed trickle-down economics. Because here's the thing. Rich people are greedy. That's why they're rich. They don't spend. And greed only begets greed. It is one of the 7 deadlies, after all. Greed doesn't share. And I know what you're thinking. Wealth sharing is bad, right? You've been gaslit. Wealth sharing, as we've been taught, is merely compensating the individual fairly for their contribution to the profit process. Oh boy. Man, if only there was an organization that existed whose sole purpose was to defend the rights of the worker. Wouldn't that be cool? So, while we've debated on should the minimum wage be this or that, and we seem to hover around this $12 to $15 an hour range at the time this episode came out, but the longer the debate, the higher that number climbs due to the rising cost of capitalism. The minimum wage should be closer to $20 an hour. I know, that sounds crazy for an untrained entry-level worker. However, by the time the minimum wage gets to $20 an hour, maybe we might actually be able to survive on $20 an hour, and it won't have gotten any higher. 15? That was 5 years ago. We're way past that today, especially after COVID. This is the problem with America's working class. The wages haven't risen with the costs of living. Now, that's somewhat normal under a capitalism paradigm, like the one we have in America. But ours is off the rails. In fact, well, that truly is the nature of capitalism. Workers make the wages, employers keep the profits. Those standards cannot be left up to the free market because from previous episodes, we've already covered historically the greedy corporate conservative executives aren't going to do what's right by the people if it means cutting into their bonuses and profit margins. And understand that phrase is the reason we have poverty, hunger, and crumbling infrastructure in America. Profit margins. And it's those profit margins that keep the American worker subjugated under capitalism and corporate socialism. In that, it's tax breaks, incentives, and cash back for the corporations, while American working class, well, we foot the bill. The wealth hoarding corporate socialism issue isn't about what we can afford or government spending at all. The issue is this. Would you rather you and your community see the rewards from your hard work, or would you rather billionaires make more billions? This too is gaslighting, which I'll cover in a bit. I know lots of people, business owner, employers, and even those employees gaslit to defend criminally wealthy people. They're scared of this topic. And while it isn't on the forefront of our narratives anymore, Ensuring that Americans earn a livable wage for an hour they give up of their life is fundamental to the working class's capitalism. We, you see, are the consumer class under capitalism. We're the laborers and the consumers. We work to consume. The wealthy don't work, nor do they consume. Not the way we do. Let me explain. If you own a boat store, you're not buying your own boats, and I certainly don't think you're going to buy your competition's boats either. So, if you own a boat store, and realistically, you'd probably already own a boat, right? You own a boat store. So you're not buying any more of your boats. So who is? Well, your boat's really expensive, right? Nice luxury boats. Now think of how many people you know who own one of those boats. Realistically, 5% of people can afford to buy your boat in our economy. So if 5% is the number, just random numbers, and you're really this rich, imagine for a second if you didn't give up as much of that rich right now, but you sort of sacrificed some of that rich moving forward just for a little while. Just go with me for a minute. If you raised the wages for those employees, if everyone did, your 5% of people who could afford your boat would exponentially grow to 20 to 25% of people who could afford your boat. Now imagine how rich you'd be then. Now, I don't understand what it is about the short-sightedness of greed. Thinking that it'll all end. I have to hoard it all, I have to have it all because it's never going to come back. That's not how our economy works. Well, unless our money's fake and we're just kind of teetering on the edge, waiting on this Bitcoin thing to blow up, see if anybody actually falls for this NFT thing. Unless there's no gold in Fort Knox or whatever, waiting for China to call back some of that credit when we finally decide to condemn them for their genocide, their deplorable human rights atrocities and inhumane treatment of its own people. Unless all that stuff. Why do we have to stay the same as we were 30 years ago? My argument is that if we give poor people more money, the economy booms. We've seen it happen before, but greed gets in the way. Corporations retaliate when you threaten their greed. Understand that when I say poor people, if you're under $250,000 a year, you're one of the poor people, certainly under $100,000. We are the poor people. A bad boss, the one who fired me for voting for Obama and propositioned me for oral favors daily for 6 years. I'll discuss that more in an upcoming episode as well, detailing my journey through capitalism. This boss, though, had told me one time when I was talking about how little money I made, the more money you got, the more money you spent, the more debt you have. That may not always be true, but we have seen from some of those who tend to boast about their wealth, their debts, when you can get them to reveal their tax records, often outweigh their self-proclaimed prosperity. If you took someone struggling paycheck to paycheck, you double their pay slowly and gradually over the next few years. You take an $8 an hour worker, and in a relatively short period of time, that same job pays closer to what it should, $16 an hour. They buy more big-ticket items. They might, maybe, invest if you teach them how. Because one thing about poor people, they love to gamble. They'll spend a Benji on scratchies just for the hope of having wealth one day. Now imagine if they invested that money in themselves or the stock market. Certainly, those people eat out more if they have more money, or they buy more expensive groceries. More. Poor buys more. Look, if you own a restaurant, you're only eating at your own restaurant so much. And that's probably discounted. Imagine if you had more people eating at your restaurant or, having it delivered. More money in the people's hands means more money flooded up into our economy. Flood up economics. How does that not make sense? I understand I'm simplifying complex global economics, inflation, interest rate, supply and demand, and almost everything else, but seriously, how does flood up economics fail? Comment, please. We have to start paying people what they're worth. That's talking about a minimum wage. We have to have a minimum wage because greed has no conscience. So think about the minimum wage. As it goes up, the ceiling goes up too, right? This is what frightens most people on the subject, right? Whoa, if you're paying somebody $8 an hour and I make $50 an hour and I'm educated and skilled and experienced and now that person makes a quarter of my pay, how is that fair? Well, it is and it isn't. It isn't because, yes, on the surface, it does devalue your position, experience, skills, and study or training in our economy, while elevating the worth of these so-called minimum wage workers, or as we referred to them during the pandemic, essential employees. You remember that term from the lockdown and the slow return from the COVID pandemic? These workers we all sort of pushed to the side for, well, forever, were suddenly the only ones coming to work, the only ones keeping everything going and together, while the $50 an hour educated, skilled, experienced, working class schlep was stuck at home. So maybe adjust how you view the value of other human beings in relation to their place in our economy and class system. You see, that sort of thinking is actually kind of fascist communism in a way. Communism, as you find in countries like Russia, China, North Korea, other nations where terrible despots and terrorists reign, those countries don't value their people any more than their people can contribute to the society. Sound familiar? Changing the way we value the individual from a financial cost-benefit analysis and holding to a more spiritual standard of that person mattering simply because they were born into this world, drew first breath, that certainly does dig a little into profit margins now, doesn't it? It's asking a lot of folks. But as the minimum raises, the ceiling must too. This $50 an hour worker would see their value in the free market increase too. Hell, I might argue that the very skilled, educated, and experienced worker will be even more valuable than before, because $8 an hour is such an inhumane and disgracefully, insultingly low wage. Setting a new standard for the minimum expectations raises everyone's minimum expectations. Think about this. If you started that $50 an hour job and you were at $38, right? But you put 20 years into that business and qualified for every pay bump you could, and now your pay is a whopping $50 an hour. Congrats, pal, you made it! $2,000 a week before taxes? Yeah, most Americans could live on that pretty comfortably. Heck, the entry wage for your job at $38 an hour was still $1,500 a week. Wait, so 20 years, 2 decades, and you're only worth $500 more? Wow, that's 20 years of loyalty, dedication, and making that company a tremendous amount of money. And we may circle back around to that later. Now, that new employee coming in with all that skill, education, and compensatory experience worthy of that previously $38 an hour would feel slighted knowing that all of that was barely worth $20 an hour more than, say, a burger flipper, if you will. I would probably agree with the caveat that we shouldn't start a pissing match over the subject of jobs and what they're worth because of this. Most people on both sides of that argument couldn't hack it switching places with the opposition. I think that's reasonable. So, that difference between the minimum wage governmentally regulated and the minimum entry-level wage any given industry or company sets must, over time, grow at similar rates. And they would, because more money would flow into our economy for everyone. But the immediate need is at the bottom of our economy. The immediate need is to raise these folks up so they can contribute to the economy, rather than suckle at the teat of it. We're rapidly approaching the end of this debate, folks. Not this episode, we're only halfway through. The end of this entire debate, because we've let this stagnate and go on so long that given what we learned from the COVID pandemic, the much dreaded by corporate America, UBI is on the horizon, whether we like it or not. The universal base income, probably one of the touchiest subjects even for leftists. Democrats won't get near it, Progressives tiptoe around it, except Andrew Yang and Bernie Sanders. Those guys seem to get it, right? At least on this topic. Basically, if you're unfamiliar, the UBI would be a set level of income each person would receive. Now, there are a lot of different philosophies on this subject and how it might be structured in America, but many countries employ the social safety net. Just think of it like Social Security, except for everyone over 18. I'm going to ask you to suspend your own disbelief for a moment, okay? Without going down that who pays for it rabbit hole. Just consider what I'm about to ask, philosophically, if you will. The reason is the economics of this and every other debate of this nature are far beyond most of our understanding and reasonings. In fact, that conversation, the who pays for it, is something that most people cannot discuss in any manner, simply because of most people's limited understanding of economic theory when it pertains to government. Sure, take a business class and you might know a little bit more than the average person. Sure, take econ in high school and maybe you can balance a budget, a checkbook, manage a household. But when we start talking about complex tax codes and global economies, government budgets, seriously, how many of us could hold our own in a superficial conversation on this topic? So why is it we insist on talking about things we can't begin to understand? Dunning-Kruger. The who pays for it deflection shuts us down before we consider whether the idea is even valid. What that does is attempt to absolve us from having to consider the moral cost of our ideas and shrug it off then as helpless and hopeless compromise we'll never reach. We can't afford it. Why are you still talking about it? Narcissistic gaslighting. Okay, now imagine for a minute if we had Medicare for all and Social Security for all as a UBI. Think about that for just a moment. We wake up every day to healthcare and a base level of guaranteed income every month. I know it sounds pie in the sky, and I know traditional conservatives' heads are going to be spinning around because of entitlements and bloated deficits, and the fact that they had to walk 10 miles uphill to school in a blizzard so everybody else should too. Regardless, an America where the working class could take care of their and their family's health while knowing that they had a guaranteed income if things fell short could be truly great. Imagine if those burdens were lifted off the working class's shoulders. Imagine what we could accomplish. Downside? Will people work as hard if they get stuff for free? Yes. In fact, I think people will work harder. Let me explain. Today, the American working class is playing from behind almost the entire game. It's a game of catch-up, paycheck to paycheck, floating bills and just taking the late fees because somebody forgot to pay the mortgage. And so now everything's off. If you have children, it's daycare and all the costs that come with kids. This is the biggest reason people aren't having children or more children, is that they can't afford them. Soak that up for a moment, right? We're willing to take away women's health care rights, force women to have children, then force them all into poverty, rather than just build a system that works for everyone, mothers, fathers, and children. The universal base income is inevitable. We're going to collapse without it. America's economy, just like our global ecology, has passed the critical tipping point of no return. The disparity in wages versus the time frame left to try and right that ship, that window is closing so fast that most businesses couldn't survive even the most gradual increase of those wages, say from $8.50 to $15 an hour over a decade. We must have corporate America and the government negotiating at the table with corporate America giving a lot to subsidize the American worker. Just like in the restaurant industry. When we ask how our economy is broken, we need look no further than restaurant math. The restaurant owner owns the restaurant. He pays his chef very well because you kind of have to. You got to invest in the quality. Managers make good money, but he pays the line workers, the dishwashers, the bussers, the hosts, whatever else. He pays them somewhere around minimum wage. The waitstaff, the ones who are the face of your customer experience, they make less than $3 an hour, plus tips, if they don't have to split those tips with other workers. The restaurant owner, thanks to conservative economic policies, gets away with paying unlivable poverty wages by promising that if those workers try hard enough, they can make up the difference and maybe more. Except that puts one group of workers in the restaurant working under separate working conditions, exclusively making them the hardest working and often worst treated employees in the business. It also puts a wage disparity, inequality, over other workers in that same position. All of your marginalized groups in America run the risk of making less than someone else, depending on who they're serving. So let's look at that restaurant math from your perspective. You go eat, you pay $20 a dish, extra $4.50 if you want a side salad, and of course your $3 tea or soda. Of course, then add the family, so your meal costs around $100, right? Now you have to pay an extra $20 if you're a decent human being, $10 if you're just a human being, for a tip, to make up the wage disparity between the greedy, cheap restaurant owner and the hard-working employee. You are subsidizing corporate wages with your tips. In fact, your tips, if we insist on being a tip-based economy, should be above and beyond the server's minimum wage, or better, hopefully. Right now, no one is subsidizing the corporate greed for the American working class. We are the servers, folks, and we don't have anyone at our tables tipping us to make up for what our greedy bosses won't pay us. Worse, we don't have time to make up that difference in our current economic paradigm that keeps failing over and over and over and over again. In fact, capitalism only has a lifespan of about 100 years, if that. That's with stringent regulation. Capitalism run amok, as we've seen since the turn of the 20th century? Well, it's failed repeatedly over and over. And as we learned from the Party Crasher series and the Progress of Board Games episodes, democratic socialism saved America every time our economy failed. With American capitalism run amok, failing 8 times since Reconstruction and barreling toward number 9 like a juggernaut, maybe it's time we learn from our past. We're all about tax breaks for corporations, and we know that restaurant servers and draw-on commission and straight commission employees, well, those are among the most exploited workers in America. They live and depend on the kindness or stupidity of others. We just discussed in food service. You make a couple of bucks an hour, and that's subsidized by your tips, which the customer pays on top of the already overpriced food. You pay way more for your food as a customer, then the restaurant owner still doesn't have to pay his employees a livable wage. Hustle, hustle, right? Draw-on commission employees are in the same position. They'll get a paltry poverty amount every month, sort of guaranteed, and they get a portion of the profits of the things they sell above and beyond that. These employees are often held to unfair, unhealthy, and exploitive working conditions. These are also some of the biggest profit margin industries in America. Straight commission? You're giving your time for free in hopes that you'll earn. You're representing a company, working for that company, doing the things for that company that they need done. But they get away with never paying you, never compensating you for your time. Aflac is one company I worked for like that, for 2 months. Lots of money in advertising to pay, none to pay their employees. In fact, as an actor on an Aflac commercial, I could earn in the tens of thousands of dollars for one commercial, a few hours of work. As an employee of Aflac, selling Aflac, I wasn't worth even a draw on commission. Now, you might ask yourself, why is Josh bashing Aflac? Won't he lose potential voiceover or camera work from Aflac? Well, Josh doesn't care about that, because before Josh would even work for Aflac, voiceover or on camera, Aflac would probably have to address some of its unfair and unethical business practices. Josh is pretty selective with whom he takes on as a client. I am more for guaranteed livable wages per hour of your life exchanged for skills, labor, or specialized knowledge. Maybe that isn't a per hour standard for all industries and jobs, But for minimum wage purposes, there needs to be a standard. When the COVID pandemic struck in the beginning of the Voldemort of all years, the one we don't talk about, say out loud for fear it might remanifest, the administration at the time, whether we want to admit it or not, whether you remember it or not, was solely focused on the economy. Everyone was concerned about the economy. But many of us were looking ahead at the long game, examining the after effects of 9/11 and trying to stave off the same thing after the lockdown. While President Trump was holding white supremacist rallies and openly campaigning for re-election, COVID was surging throughout the world. Cruise ships full of people held in quarantine, entire countries locked down, like Italy, where we really started to see some models of what was to come for America if we didn't act. And we didn't act. The concerns for many Americans were for their lives and the lives of others. For many others, the concerns were more about money or some misinterpreted defense of their freedoms. In press conferences and statements, comments were all about opening up the economy and getting people back to work so they could spend more money. This was the sentiment expressed by the Trump administration repeatedly in that year. When it came to relief, conservatives argued over entitlements and against actions that could have saved lives. When it came to the ventilator crisis, the PPE crisis, the treatment propaganda, the claims of a hoax, and even the vaccine, it was all about profit. It wasn't, how can we get these ventilators where they're needed to save lives? It was, how can we make the biggest profit from this? Or for our friends. This isn't bias or lean. I was there. I, just like everyone else, was watching closely to see how that administration would handle the pandemic. Now, personally, I was rooting that they would do the right thing and somehow prove to be effective. Just that one time. Even though I feared the worst, that a successful response to that crisis would essentially make Trump a wartime-like president, and like many before him who should have been ousted, Nixon, Wilson, Bush II, and others, I was afraid Trump would win re-election based on one factor in his favor amidst an ocean of failures. Still, even with my desire for the Trump administration to end and go down in flames and go to jail, that desire didn't supersede my foundational human principle of for hundreds of thousands of lives not to be lost to an inept and corrupt response to a global pandemic. It was all about the money, and over 1 million Americans paid the greatest sacrifice. For the short game, maybe it is keep the economy open as long as we can and end the lockdown as fast as we can so people can get back to work and spending money. The problem is, we saw the economic ramifications stretch out. There are businesses that will never exist again because of that pandemic and lockdown, and how it was handled. Had the government stepped in and intervened properly, prudently, progressively, and with priority, the real solutions could have come. Outcomes would have been very different. I mean, isn't this what the federal government is for? The federal government should exist to step in and help in moments of a national crisis. Don't you agree? If you don't want them involved in anything else, I believe a federal government should exist to save our collective assets, even when we don't do the things necessary to save our own. And we don't. We, the people, rarely do. It's simply unfair and entitled to call it federal overreach, when people aren't doing the bare minimum asked to ensure we have and keep those freedoms at all. It's gaslighting, narcissism, or daft ignorance of fact. This is why we must have a federal mandate on the morality of the minimum wage. Our system seems insistent on somehow governing morality, or at least trying to, except when it comes to solving most of the people's problems, which is not having enough money. You put the money in the people's hands. A $15 minimum wage, we're past that. And the longer you argue about it, the higher it's going up. Keep arguing, we'll be at $20 in a few years, and it should be. That's how an economy should work, like it or not. The more money people make, the more everyone makes. Instead, we've operated for decades under the more money we make, the more money your boss makes. the broken paradigm. But if you come in extra on the weekends without pay and stay late, we might bump you another $800 a year. We had a good year. Congratulations. I mean, I made $800,000, but here's less than $75 a month to show my appreciation for all my wealth. What if that $800,000 boss made that paltry, insulting $800 a year raise up to $8,000? Dude's got $800,000. Now, how many more boats is that guy buying? How many boats will the $8,000 guy buy? It's at least a down payment. We know the $800 guy isn't buying anything. Maybe he might if he has a credit card, but more likely that $800 person is using that raise for their student loans or to pay off interest on her already maxed out credit card. Maybe that's what we're afraid of. Maybe that's where we're at with our economy. Maybe we realize what we've done. Maybe we realize that we've allowed ourselves to become a shallow, superficial, consumer-based, keeping up with the Joneses, materialistic society. I've fallen prey to it. I bought a new car when I didn't need to. We all do it. We're pretty much all materialistic in some way, and every spirituality preaches against that. Actually, it preaches the exact opposite, But we give into it because we want that new phone, the new appliances, the new shoes, the new home, the new. We are a materialistic society, each and every one of us, no matter how minimalist we might claim to be. So why don't we just admit we're compromising some of our foundational beliefs in every aspect of our lives? So why can't we just compromise some of those values to look at people as human beings and pay them accordingly? Why are we still fighting about this? Why are we still fighting for what human beings are worth? Raising wages isn't the only solution, though. I mean, we could keep wages the same, keep them where they are, but something has to give. Some compromises have to be made, like a UBI or a completely socialized economy. A swing from corporate welfare to public welfare. We can't privatize everything and keep wages rising at the rate they are. How about a compromise of incorporating some of that good old-fashioned democratic socialism that's saved America's ass each and every time she's failed to keep wages reasonable for the employers? Hear me out. Education is for profit. Healthcare is for profit. Most municipal services that didn't always used to be for profit are now privatized, even if some claim to be nonprofit. Everything in America is owned and sold to us by corporations with no interest in the American working class, beyond what the American working class can buy. So, universal health care, especially including mental health, affordable and subsidized higher education, and a fully funded and totally reformed public education system. A tighter and fractioned defense budget, fewer soldiers, and more students. And things like electricity, internet, water, and sewer services, along with local waste disposal, just to start. These are things the American people pay for from the already bled dry low wages corporations are paying us. These costs can account for well over half of an American's monthly budget. At the end of the day, the minimum wage argument, simplified, is this. Do you believe human beings deserve a livable wage in exchange for an hour of their lives that, for working a minimum wage job with a reasonably agreed upon full-time schedule, a human being deserves to provide for their family, put a roof over their heads, and keep the lights on? That's really it. Just basic human dignity in our economy. That's the humanity of it. The deciding factor is humanity. Everything else is a compromise on the morals, integrity, and ethics of humanity. So to the argument at the top of this episode, yeah, I'm giving the homeless guy money. I don't believe the job helps him any more than giving the guy something to do, somewhere to be, and not much else. A job is just something to do to exchange your skills for compensation. Be loyal to you and yours, because your boss isn't loyal to you. A job isn't your life. Work to live. Don't live to work. And let's make it where more people can afford to work and live. Coming up in the next episode, Labor Pains, we go a little more in depth on how the American working class has been subjugated under the oppressive boot of white, affluent, capitalistic privilege. I'm going to further my case that America is not a two-party system and shouldn't be. I'm tired of hearing, now isn't the time to defy the left. In the next episode, I'm going to make the claim that the only people saying that are the Democrats who want to be Republicans, and that now is the time to unite the left, but maybe not under the Democratic Party. In Labor Pains, I'm conceiving a new political party that could give birth to major change for the American working class as I deconstruct our culture of cultism. Thanks for joining me. Like, share, and subscribe, and do all the things if you like this series. And if you do like the series, consider a donation to my Cash App or subscribe on Patreon. I'm Josh Brand, and I'm overthinking everything.